Hey guys, my name's Ed. Welcome to Tech to Boot. Today I'm going to teach you guys how to code in PHP. This is part one in a long series of videos I plan on doing for teaching all aspects of PHP. This video is geared towards total beginners who know absolutely nothing about programming, as well as experienced programmers who just want to get their feet wet and learn some of the basics to PHP today. Today I'm diving straight into the code, so if you want to learn more about what PHP is, or its history, check out the Wikipedia article in the description below. And this video also assumes you know the basics about websites, you know how to make web pages, and you also have a server or PHP installed on your computer so that you can run PHP files and actually code in it. And if you don't, I'm going to do videos in the future on how to set up a web server, picking out hosting, and all sorts of things like that. So let's get started. Alright guys, so the subjects of the video today, we're going to get into creating variables in PHP, as well as functions, debugging variables, and working with server variables. But before we could do any of that, we got to learn how to also output text to the screen and learn some of the basics to PHP. So I went ahead and FTP'd into my server, and I created a file called test.php. So wherever you're running your PHP page, or code from rather, create your PHP document now. And if everything's configured correctly, all you should have to do is put the .php extension on that page. And it should allow that file to execute PHP code. So to actually run PHP, what you gotta do is create a PHP opening tag. And it looks like this. It's an opening arrow with a question mark and the letters PHP, just like that. Now, there's also a shorthand version of this where you can just execute PHP like this. Now, as of like 5.1 or 3, I believe, they disabled that by default. Then it's safest to stick with the PHP letters as part of that code. And we'll save, and that's it. When this opening tag is set, that means that anything afterwards will be interpreted by PHP and actually executed. So to demonstrate that, we'll output some text on the screen. So there's two commands you could use for that, more than two, but the most common two, I should rather say, is the echo and print commands. So we're going to type the word echo and then a set of double quotes, and you can use single quotes as well, and there's different ways that those function if you're outputting variables or other data in there. For now, we'll just stick with double quotes and type hello world. And we're going to end that statement with a semicolon. So go ahead and save your file. And if I refresh, I have the text here, hello world. So that's how you output text to the screen in PHP. You can also put HTML code in here. So if I put a break tag, that would actually be interpreted on the web page. And I'll put another variable, or not a variable yet, but a command, print command. And we'll put some text. This is some text. So they both function in very similar ways. It's just your preference, really, which you like to use more. I like the echo command. It's actually one less character to type, and not too many programming languages. I don't think any have a command called echo. And if we look, there it is. So we'll see that our break tag actually got rendered as HTML. So you could put HTML as well as JavaScript and other things in your commands with PHP. So that's pretty cool. Alright, so you'll notice I don't have anything after here, and I'm teaching you guys a little hack or trick to PHP in your first lesson. To close PHP, you actually put a closing PHP tag like this. And when I do that, it basically ends all the PHP execution here, and then I can write some more HTML on my page. So div, here is some content, and a closing div. And then let's do another PHP statement. We'll do some text here. And we'll output that. And there it is. So as you can see, the opening and closing PHP tag basically allows you to enter and leave PHP throughout your code. So it makes it nice so that you can separate your PHP from your HTML. So you don't have to use echo and print commands all the time when you want to display text, or if you're not really using variables or any dynamic content. And again, this is the end of my document, so technically I don't even need that closing tag here. I can save, and then it will still render correctly with no errors. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase everything except for my opening tag here, and now we're going to get started with variables. So we're going to create a real simple variable called username. So to create a variable, all you do is use the $sign and then the name of the variable you want. In this case, I'm going to put username, and I'm going to put a space with an equal sign and another space, and then the value I want to assign to that variable. In this case, I'm creating a string variable, and I'm going to give my username a value of Squidward. And to close that variable, I'm using a semicolon symbol. And I'll demonstrate how this works. I'm just going to use an echo command and print that username to the screen. So if we refresh, there it is, Squidward. Now, if you're new to programming, just think of a variable as a value that could be reused and manipulated throughout a program. So I can echo this username as many times as I want. So if you had a username that you wanted to display in the top corner of your website, and then maybe like on the left-hand side, or even in an email or something, that's a variable. That's how variables work. You can constantly reuse them and output them as many times as you want. Now, if I change that value, then it will display something different. So if I made it SpongeBob and I echoed it, this time it would display SpongeBob. So that's your basics to how a string variable works. Now for the more seasoned programmers out there, PHP does not require you to declare the data types, which is really nice, and that's why I love the language. It kind of does things for you already. So for example, let's say I had a variable that I wanted to store a person's age in. I could make a variable called age and just put the number 29. So that variable would be treated as an integer because I'm not using quotes around it, so it's not being treated as a string. Again, unlike other programming languages, I don't have to explicitly type or tell it that. It should automatically know that this is a number. And another plus side, unlike other languages, you don't have to convert integers or doubles or floats to a string to output them. So I could just echo the age and it will display it. So you can almost treat it like a string and just show it on your screen, and that's it. So to get a little deeper into variables, one more concept I want to teach is using pointers. It's not something I use really at all, but it's an important basic. So I'll make another variable called name, followed by a space, and then I'm going to put the ampersand symbol with username. And if I echo name, save it and refresh, you'll see that it displays Squidward. So that is because this variable is using a pointer to username. And if I change my name variable now to SpongeBob, it is also going to change that pointer because this variable is really a pointer that goes to that username variable. So if I echo username, it will contain the value SpongeBob. So that's the basics of variables and how pointers work within PHP. Okay, I erased all my code except for my PHP opening statement, and now we're going to get into functions. So to create a function, all you do is type the word function followed by the name you want to give that function. I'm going to name mine example, and then a set of parentheses. If you're using variables, you could put them in here, like name. For now, we're not getting into that. And all the code that executes in your function will go in between an opening and closing bracket. So inside of this function, I'm just going to use the echo command, type hello world with a break tag. And unlike variables in the echo, you don't need the semicolon at the end of the function. And to call that function, we will just call the name of it, parentheses, and then the semicolon there. And if I reload that, there it is, hello world. So that's how you create a function. And if you're new to programming, a function's kind of similar to a variable, except you can store actual commands and code inside of that. So it's not just a placeholder, but something that executes code. And I can put that as many times as I want here, call that function as many times as I want, and every time I call it, all of the code in that function will get executed. Okay, so the next concept we'll get into is using variables or returning variables from a function. So I'll erase this, and this function will make our username variable again, just for example, and Squidward, and return that username. Now, if I echo that function now, it will return that variable in there, Squidward. There it is. So we can also assign a variable to that. Name equals example, and echo that name. And there it is. Now, as of PHP 7, it's not required, but you can actually assign a data type to that function that's returning a value. So you can actually put a set of double dots followed by string, and that will return this as a string value. And similar to string, or different rather, you can also use integers. So I could put age 29 and change the return type as an int. And same thing as variables, I don't have to convert that return value into a string. I could just output it and it will display it. So that's how to return variables from a function, and how to set the data type of the function as well. Okay, the next thing I want to get into are server variables. So if you don't know what those are, there's something that you can create and define to pass data in between web pages. So in this URL, what I've done is put a question mark, and that will everything after that can be treated as a variable. So I created rather, a variable called test, and I gave it the value of nothing. And so now I want to access this variable called test from my address bar or URL. So how do I do that? To do that, we use a reserved variable in PHP called get. So I will call this test. We'll create a variable called test, and we will access the reserved PHP variable called get. And inside of those single quotes here, I am going to put the name of that server variable up here called test. And if I echo that here, we will see that it displays our server variable value of nothing. And if I change this to something else, like that's the word something, it will display what's in there. And that is the basics to how you do server variables. Okay, if I had more than one variable up here, I could separate them with an ampersand. And let's make one called username equals Squidward to demonstrate that again. Not that you'd ever put a username in your server variables, but just to demonstrate how they work. Okay, and here I will create another variable called username, and use the get variable again, and in here we'll put username and echo that. And there it is. And if I change the value in there to something else, then what's being displayed will reflect upon that. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about today is the var dump function in PHP. So what it is a predefined function in PHP that allows you to debug variables and learn more information about them. So for example, I'm going to put var dump. It's var followed by an underscore and then the word dump. And for now, we'll put our test variable in there. So if I save and refresh, we will see that some information is returned about our variable called test. It's a string of 9 characters and it contains the value something. So if I put get in here, that will return everything about get and all our server variables. So here it is. Get is an array that has 2 items in it, and the items are test and username. And we can see that they're both strings of 9 characters, and it puts the values in there. So var dump is a very useful function to memorize for debugging and testing variables. Alright guys, that's a wrap for part 1. So we learned how to do variables in PHP, how to create functions, and how to debug variables, and that's about it. So yeah, stay tuned for part 2, and if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.